I stood and watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. I could hear the quiet noise of traffic and muffled conversations in the background as friends and family left my wife's grave. My children, Alexander, 21, and Chelsea, 20, stood on either side of me. We hugged each other and processed the grief. I could feel them shaking as they quietly cried with me. Unfortunately, their grief was much greater than mine. I knew I should be more upset about Joan's death, but in some twisted way, I was glad it had turned out this way. At least this way I was spared the pain and suffering of divorce and the financial turmoil it would have entailed. Divorce, you ask? Well, yes. You see, the night she died in a traffic accident, I found out I was married to a lying, cheating whore. I sighed and remembered again the happiness of our early years and how my marriage had spiraled out of control over the past 2 years. Joan and I dated all through my last year of high school and my first year of college. We developed a relationship. In our first semester of college, we almost lost our scholarships because we were so accepting of hanging out. Sure, we had to live in the dorms, but we still found a way to be together almost every night. It seemed like the right time for Joan to go back to college never came. Finally, when Alexander was a freshman and Chelsea was a senior in high school, Joan went back to college. She treated it like a duck to water. As if she had never dropped out, she dove headfirst into her classes and unfortunately decided to experience the whole college experience. She made friends who were a little younger than her, right up to the age of our kids. If they were good people, she accepted them into her circle of friends. As she became more and more immersed in the social life of college, she began to change. She was no longer my loving stay-at-home wife. She started treating me with disdain and getting upset when I complained about her spending a lot of time out of the house in the evenings. She started coming home later and later, was drunk many times, and her clothes were disheveled. Joan became aloof and resented social outings with our friends or my work. Of course, she had a reason for coming home late on non-holiday nights and also on those nights when she had classes. According to her, she had to study at the library, she had a night class, and afterwards she and her friends would go to a local hangout to discuss the class. She needed to relax, etc. I guess I was like most cuckolds. I just didn't notice the signs of a cheating slut. All I knew for sure was that our life went downhill about a year after she went back to college. She always had an excuse. Too tired, headache, had to get up early the next day, and so on. I had fun with her once a week if I was lucky, and then it was like it was just a favor she was doing me. Literally, my world came crashing down on Thursday night. Joan had an evening class that was supposed to end around 9:20 p.m. Given the distance we lived from the university and the traffic, she had to be home no later than 10:15 p.m. I finally gave in and went to bed without her at 11:30. Of course, I was angry. She promised me that she would stop going out with her friends, that she would come home earlier. Che. The doorbell woke me up at 1:20 a.m. No sooner had I gotten to the door than someone started pounding on it. Okay, okay, I yelled, grabbed my pants, turned on the bedroom light, and stumbled my way to the front room. Who's there? I asked. Finally, I got to the door and swung it open. I was furious, expecting to find that my drunken wife wanted in and couldn't get the key into the lock. I stopped in shock when I saw a police officer standing on the porch of my house. I looked further through the open door and saw a black and white car sitting in my driveway. The officer flinched, then asked, Mr. Rowland? Yes. Your wife is Joan Rowland? When I nodded my head in agreement, the officer continued. Mr. Rowland, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. The van your wife was riding in this evening was hit by a semi-truck. I'm afraid she and the 3 young men traveling with her were killed in the accident. The driver of the semi-truck was obviously drunk and ran a red light at a high rate of speed. Excuse me, sir. Are you alone, sir? Or is there someone you can call? About that time, my daughter Chelsea came down the stairs. She was dressed in a robe and was wiping her eyes from sleep. Daddy, what's wrong? The officer looked at her, then said, Sir, I'm sorry. If you stop by the station in a day or two, the accident report will be ready. We'll also need you to examine the body for verification at your earliest convenience. He tipped his hat and said, Ma'am, I'll just leave you guys to it. Again, I apologize. I stood in the doorway and watched the police car pull away from my driveway. I could feel the tears streaming down my cheeks, and then Chelsea put her arms around me and led me back into the house. After I told her what had happened, we sat in the living room together and cried. We dozed off sitting together on the couch. Finally, around 6 in the morning, I shook myself awake and started making plans for the next few days. I called my son at his apartment, then Joan's parents and my parents. I also called the funeral home and arranged for them to pick up the body. I was still in a state of shock, but I was starting to come around a bit. Before I could think about the implications of my wife's death, the man from the funeral home called. He said they could only pick up the body after I identified it. I called to make an appointment to see Joan. While I was on the phone, I remembered that the officer had said Joan had died while riding in the van. I called the police to make sure she wasn't in her car. I also asked about her purse and other personal items. The officer told me that they did not have any of Joan's personal belongings. From the records, they tentatively identified her by the medical bracelet she was wearing. After I identified Joan's body, my daughter and I went to the university and drove around until we found Joan's parked car. I gave Chelsea the spare key. I waited for her to start the car and followed her toward home. When we got home, Chelsea and I searched the interior of the car, looking for Joan's purse and books. When they weren't there, we opened the trunk and found several items, many of which shouldn't have been there. Joan's purse was lying neatly in the trunk on top of the neatly folded dress she had worn to class the night before. Opening the purse revealed several unused condoms. Later that day, to pass the time, I started cleaning the car and found 3 used condoms under the front seat to pass the time. I started to get frustrated, even angry. Sometimes Chelsea drives to college in our car instead of her little pickup truck. My first thought was that she was entertaining one of her guy friends in the back seat. I got out of the car, evidence in hand, and yelled, "Chelsea, come here for a minute, please." When Chelsea entered the garage, her eyes still red from crying, I turned to her and growled, "How do you explain this?" I watched her turn white and then red as I continued to speak. I thought, no, I hoped we raised you better than this. You know it's not the best form of birth control. I know your mom told you how much trouble you could get into using them. How could you risk that? Chelsea stood staring at me in shock. Then her face broke and she burst into tears again. Through her tears, I heard her say, "Daddy, how could you think I would do something like that? Are you telling me they're not yours? You borrowed the car last weekend. Who else could have?" I felt my stomach clench, and I felt nauseous. I stopped talking and looked at my daughter. She was looking into my eyes, and I could see that the same thought had visited her too. Her hand came up to her mouth and she blushed again. "Oh," she said. "Oh, no, no, Daddy, it can't be. Maybe it was Alex. He uses Mom's car sometimes." And then the rest of that day and the next were filled with phone calls and visits from family and friends. Our relatives from out of town started coming to services. I finally called the police station and learned that the accident report was ready. I told my family I was on my way to pick it up, and then Chelsea looked up from her conversation. "Hold on, Daddy. I'm coming with you." I started to tell her no, that I wanted to be alone, but she kept talking, not letting me finish. "No, Daddy. I'm going. You don't need to do this alone, and besides..." Well, when we got to the police station and told the female officer why we were here, she got a sad look on her face. She turned and walked over to the file cabinet in the back room. She took an envelope from the folder and walked back to the window. She placed the envelope on the counter and ran her hand over it. She looked at my face and said, "Mr. Rowland, I don't know how much you've been told about this accident, but..." She took a deep breath and exhaled and then continued. "You really shouldn't look at that report unless you need to. Just let your wife go and keep the good memories." "I'm sorry, sir." I stood in confusion for a moment, then snatched the report out from under her hand. "Thank you, officer. We had some problems, but we loved each other deeply. Of course, we'll have good memories of our life with Joan." The officer threw me a pained look and turned back to her desk as Chelsea and I walked out of the station. As we got into my truck, I took a moment and opened the report. The first thing I saw was a stack of photos. The van was a mangled mess, with the cab of the semi resting on top of it and the front bumper just where the center seat should have been. I shifted my gaze to the next photo and took a breath. My stomach clenched, and I let out a deep sob. Chelsea turned to me and asked, "Daddy, what happened?" I shook my head and tried to stuff the pictures back into the envelope. I was crying so hard it was hard to breathe. I felt my stomach cramp up and began to feel my breakfast trying to rise. I dropped the envelope and just had time to open the door before my stomach started emptying into the parking lot. "Oh no," I heard Chelsea moan. I finished vomiting and wiped my mouth with the back of my palm. I turned back to the truck in time to catch my daughter when she hugged me and started crying. Now we knew why Joan's dress was folded up in the trunk of her car. The pictures in the newspaper had the whole sordid story written all over it. We finally decided that she kept the clothes in the trunk in case she got dirty or something. Now I knew the truth. She was dirty, but not in the way I had assumed. There was no sign of foul play. Joan appeared to have voluntarily entered the van with the men. At first, the police suggested that Joan might have been forced into the van. But the investigation found several witnesses who saw her leave with the three young men. Apparently, they left the classroom at recess in the middle of class. Our family was devastated first by Joan's death, and now even more so by her promiscuous behavior. I knew she was unhappy with her life, but I had no idea that she had become a whore. When I thought about her behavior, I became fearful for my own health. I didn't know how long she had been sleeping around, and I was afraid she might have given me some kind of disease. I made a note to get checked for STDs immediately. Fortunately, I didn't have to worry about my job. I owned a small construction company, so I didn't have to worry much about work. I had a good management structure, and my friends at work helped me get the job done right and on time. Within a few weeks, I was a mess. I was angry and lashing out at everyone. I was so angry at my wife and the three guys who were having fun with her that I would sometimes scream, wishing they were alive so I could hurt them more. Heck, one of them was only 19 years old. He was younger than our son. The others were in their early 20s. I wanted to hurt someone, but I couldn't do it because they were all dead. I kept putting off going to the doctor to get an STD test because I was embarrassed to do it. Finally, my kids made an appointment for me and took me to the doctor. After the test results came back, I found out I had gonorrhea. I know I should have gotten tested as soon as I thought about getting sick, but I just didn't. It had been so long since Joan had allowed me to do it with her that I went back to doing my own thing. One day, about 3 weeks after the funeral, I was sitting in my living room drinking and going over the accident report. I felt like making someone pay for my pain again, and then it hit me. I couldn't make my whore wife or her lovers pay, but I could get to the trucking company for denying me that opportunity. I decided to see if I could sue them. When I contacted the lawyer, he was almost cackling with joy. It seems this company had a habit of hiring incompetent drivers. They had a history of accidents and traffic violations. He thought it would help with any case we brought against them. I told him to file a lawsuit, and off we went. Of course, as it happens in these cases, the case dragged on, but eventually ended. Nearly 2 years after the accident, I was living almost $3 million better off, even after the lawyer took his 30%. My life was still in the crapper, but at least I now had the means to build a really nice house. Life was horrible. I was no longer enjoying my job, and I couldn't be in the house my wife and I had built for ourselves. I finally decided that I would just drop everything and move away. I know I was running from my memories and pain, but so what? At the end of May, my son graduated from college with a degree in construction management. He had already been working part-time for the company for several years, and I decided to hand over day-to-day management to him. I allowed him and his new wife to live in my house rent-free, on the condition that the guest house was always at my disposal. My daughter had her own apartment in the basement. She had taken up residence in a room that at one time was intended for servants. I made it clear to her that she could continue to live in her basement apartment until she decided to move. I prepared legal documents that spelled out living arrangements, job, salary, responsibilities, and so on. I had no idea when I would return home or where I would be going, so I tried to provide for everything. And my daughter was getting a degree in business administration and was also working part-time for a company, so I felt safe leaving. 3 weeks after graduating from college, I loaded up my brand new F250 Super Crew Powerstroke 4x4 and hit the road. I had no idea where I was going, when I would get there, or how long it would take me to get there. I had a small 26-foot fifth-wheel trailer with everything I needed inside. I guess the hippies of the 1960s would say I was trying to find myself. I was hauling my little 650cc motorcycle on a rack I had constructed in the back of the trailer. Since it was early summer when I left, I turned my nose north and rode. It was amazing. The farther away from home I got, the more relaxed I felt. The first day I drove 12 hours, stopping only for gas and other necessities. The second day was the same, and then I arrived in Rapid City, SD. I had never been there and fell in love with the Black Hills. I found a small campground and settled in. Every day I got up to see the sunrise. I would leisurely drink coffee, enjoying the morning, and then have a late breakfast. In mid-morning, when it warmed up a bit, I would go for a bike ride. If I saw a beautiful place, I would stop and enjoy the view, or go down the trail to admire the view, or bike to it. I took many scenic rides on my bike while enjoying the Black Hills. I especially liked the little town of Keystone, SD. I rode the train between there and Hill City several times and explored both towns very well. There were a lot of beautiful women there, too. Several local wineries make outstanding wine. Perhaps I bought and drank too much of it, but so what? In the evenings, I would go out to dinner in town or to a bar, or I would cook at camp and have a drink with my 3 companions. Me, and me. Sometimes, while walking around camp, I would stop and visit with other campers. Occasionally, someone would stop at my place as well. I was surprised at how many of the campers were regular travelers. Many of them didn't have homes, just trailers or motorhomes. Wow. They all seemed so happy. We exchanged stories. At first, I didn't want to talk about Joan, but eventually I just said that my wife was killed in a traffic accident and I needed to get away to heal. Many times I was not asked for details about her, and rarely about my children. It helped me and allowed me to bury the pain somewhat. I spent 3 weeks at this campground and then decided to move on. I continued west on I-90 highway and came to a little town called Sturgis. Oh, you've heard of it? Well, I found out that the bike rally was about to start, so I decided to stay. I found a good place to put my trailer and started setting up. I stayed there until the end of the rally, and oh, how much fun I had. By the time the rally got into full swing, I had learned to wave off comments about the small size of my bike. Of course, I suppose my willingness to provide my new friends with beer and some lovely ladies with a bed to sleep in helped too. I had to leave to get a break from all the things I had time to do. I still wake up and dream about all those beautiful ladies who were strutting around the camp showing off their wares. Was I ashamed of my actions? Oh, hell no. I was no longer married, and as far as I knew, neither were the ladies I was sleeping with. I continued west on I-90 and fell in love with Montana too. I stayed several times in western Montana, again meeting wonderful people at the campgrounds. One campground in particular was particularly memorable. It was near the small town of Rock Springs, located a little east of Missoula. There was a testicle festival going on there. There were cowboys, cowgirls, bikers and their bitches, and regular people like me. I was only there for 1 day and night. During the day, I got to see a wonderful wet t-shirt contest. I must confess that I did nothing but watch that evening. The next morning, I traveled on and was out of the mountains by late afternoon. I decided I didn't really like the country I was driving through. I depressed the gas pedal and tore towards Seattle, Washington. Oh boy, I spent another month there just sightseeing. I relaxed on the beach for a few days, then hiked up Mount Rainier and relaxed again. I was regaining my strength, forgetting about my pain, and it felt great. Finally, I decided to move south and took US 1 and 101 highways. If I saw a place I liked, I stopped. It took me another 6 weeks to get to San Francisco. I stayed there for a few days and then moved south. For some reason, Southern California didn't appeal to me. There were lots of beautiful women there, and on the beaches they displayed their wares for all to see. But something about their behavior left me cold. They seemed uninteresting and fake to me, so I headed east on the I-10 freeway. Oh my. Boring. This part of the US consisted of miles and miles and miles and miles. I finally arrived in one of my favorite cities, San Antonio. Joan and I really enjoyed the river trip, and even though I had memories of it, I enjoyed my week there. I found even more great food and beautiful, willing women. I met one girl who quickly won my heart. She was part Latina and worked at the campground where I parked my trailer. She checked me in, and for some reason we got along very well. In the evening when I checked in, I was sitting under the awning of my trailer, and she was walking down the road in a tiny two-piece swimsuit. All of her parts were on display, and she was perfect. I figured out her age. About 22 or 23. It later turned out that she was 27. She was about 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed about 125 pounds. Her black hair was almost shoulder length, and her smile lit up the evening when she saw me. The little varmint walked up to me and said, "What are you doing out here in this heat? At least you should be in the pool and cooling off. I know for a fact it's nice and cool in there. If you don't like the pool, many of us go down to the river and swim there. The pool is cleaner, though." I know it's hot here, but I was just enjoying the views. I'll probably get to the pool soon. I really needed to unwind after my day trip. Well, come on down soon. The water's great down there, and there's usually some nice people to chat with. Mary smiled sweetly at me and turned back toward the center of the campground and the pool, located about 75 feet from my spot. I got up and went inside to change into my swim trunks and then followed her to the pool. When I got there, Maria was swimming, however, in the deep pool. In the shallow end were two younger children with a chubby woman I mistook for their mother. An older couple was sitting at one of the tables reading. I dove into the water and swam 3 laps quickly, then climbed out and got my lounge chair. I jumped into the water and climbed into the chair. It sank under my weight so that only my shoulders and head were showing out of the water. Leaning back, I opened my beer and watched Maria. Maria and I talked for over an hour before she had to leave. I learned that she was the daughter of the owner and had just gotten her degree in business management. She was married, but her husband was drinking and promiscuous, so she divorced him. She moved back home to help her parents until she decided what she wanted to do with her life. Her parents were semi-retired, and she was trying to decide if she wanted to run a business for them or go into another line of work. She liked the relaxed atmosphere of the camp, but the earning potential was less than other places. Over the next 2 days, Maria and I became very close. She was easy to talk to and a lot of fun. I told her about my marriage and how I eventually just handed my business over to my kids and went off into oblivion. We discussed her desires and dreams. During my trips outside of camp, I noticed that there was no store or gas station within some distance. Besides the camp, which was large, there were several houses nearby. I suggested that she and her parents open a small store that would sell fuel. Mary became excited about the idea, and we discussed feasibility studies, research to see if the idea was viable. That evening when we left the pool, Maria followed me to my trailer. I don't know when we did it, but on the way back to my place we held hands. Maria looked up at me and pulled closer to me. We stopped outside my door, and she turned to face me. In a daze, I followed this beautiful creature into my house. Maria slammed the door behind us, and I don't know how it happened either. but we got busy. I woke up the next morning at the crack of dawn. I grabbed my shaving kit, towel, and bathing suit, and then left. I was only gone about 10 minutes, but when I came out of the restroom, I met Maria's father. He looked concerned and stopped me. Steve, have you seen Maria? She was going to the pool last night, but she never came home. That doesn't sound like her. Her mother and I are worried something's happened to her. Oh, shit, I thought. I just stood there staring at him for a minute. What could I say to this concerned father? I knew how I would feel if one of my kids, even as old as he was when I left home, didn't come home or called to say he was gone. I heard my trailer door close behind me and saw Maria's father's face when he saw her. His gaze moved to her, then to my face. I felt myself blush. Maria walked over to me and put her arm around my waist. Daddy, I'm sorry I bothered you. I wasn't going out all night. Steve and I just fell asleep and I didn't get a chance to call or come home. I hugged Maria and said, Shit. That didn't go well. Maria, I'm really sorry. I don't know how to fix this. You really should have called him or gone home last night. Now I guess I better move on before things get worse. Do you think I should talk to him? No, Steve. This is my fault. I'll make it right. Please don't leave because of this. Please? Maria went to the camp office where her father had gone. I went back to my trailer and made coffee. I sat on my mat and watched the office. I could hear raised voices and I thought I could hear Maria crying. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer and walked over to the office. I walked in and heard Maria and her parents talking in the back room. I walked around the counter and entered the small break room. All three family members looked up when I entered. Maria's father and mother stared at me as I entered. Maria looked guilty and chastised. Mr. Hardy, I owe you an apology. I had no right to. I know how I would feel if my daughter did something like that. I just didn't think, and I'm afraid I took advantage of it. I let my and Maria's friendship and need for companionship override my common sense and honor. Please don't be too hard on Maria. I paid for a week's stay here, but in light of this fiasco, I will be leaving as soon as I can today. Please forgive me for causing your family so much trouble. Maria is a beautiful girl, and you should be proud of her. Felicia gasped and pressed her hands to her face. She began to cry and said, How can we be proud of what she did this night? We taught her that you can't sleep like that. Mr. Hardy looked at his wife, then at me. He took a step toward me and stopped. He turned to his wife and enclosed her in his arms. I felt my face redden, and I let out another apology. No, I didn't mean it like that. Yes, we acted rashly, but that's not what I meant at all. Maria has a degree from a good college. She is intelligent, educated, and capable. She's a fine young woman. I'm sure she feels bad about bothering you. Look at the sadness on her face. But be proud of her accomplishments and forgive her and forgive us for breaking decorum. Maria drew close to me and put her arm around my waist. She leaned her head on my shoulder and looked into my face. The corners of her eyes showed moisture. She turned to her parents again and said, Mom, Dad, I told you I was sorry to bother you. I didn't mean to do it, but, Mom, I'm a woman now, and I have feminine needs. I like this man. He's special, and I let my emotions rule me last night. Mom, you know he wasn't my first. Please don't blame him for that. I led him to the trailer and got in before he did. I rushed over to him. Maria smiled at me and then continued. He's only a man, Mom. He did what nature intended. Felicia gasped and blushed again. Mr. Hardy looked at both of us, but especially at Maria. He lowered his eyes and said, You're right, Maria. You are a woman now and should live your own life. We just expect more attention from you while you live under our roof. I don't like you sleeping around, but that's your decision. Just from now on, please let us know so we don't worry so much. Mr. Hardy turned to me and continued, Steve, I can't say I like or approve of what you two have done. Heck, you're old enough to be her father, for goodness sake. How would you feel if a man your age slept with your daughter? However, there's no reason to leave if you don't want to. What's done is done. I think it would be best if I left. I turned and started to leave, but Maria held me back. Maria looked startled and said, "No, please, Steve. Don't leave now. Please. I want to talk to you about business and just please stay a few more days." For me, I gave in and stayed another week. Maria and I talked about plans for the business and her future. I had never been as close to her parents as I had been, but they were polite to me. Mr. Hardy liked the idea of opening a small market and fuel depot. I made suggestions for the project and spent a lot of time with Maria. She was very special. I felt more alive with her than I had since Joan's death. By the time I decided to leave San Antonio, it was getting chilly at home. Not only did I not want to go home, but I didn't want to return to winter weather, so I decided to drive on to Florida. The day I was leaving, Maria was crying. She clung to me and made a spectacle of kissing me goodbye. I even saw some regret on her parents' face. Strangely enough, I was having a hard time moving on too. I had a business card for the company that had their phone number, email, and mailing address on it. I knew they had my phone number and email address, which I had listed on the registration card. Maria stood looking after me as I drove away. As long as the campground was in sight, I could see her if I looked in the rearview mirror. I found myself driving again on the I-10 highway heading east. At least this time the landscape wasn't as desolate as west of San Antonio. I had 5 days before I booked a spot that was carved in stone. I made the most of them and took a leisurely drive east. See, I owned a few weeks of timeshare with a company that had their resorts in the southeast. I planned to spend some time at these properties, otherwise I could have stayed with Maria longer. I lay by the pools and chilled at the resorts, but something was missing. As I recovered, I met more nice people and enjoyed socializing more and more, but I missed the good times I had in San Antonio. I moved further south and finally made it to the Florida Keys, ending up in Key West. It's so crowded there that I used my bicycle to get around most of the time. I had to be careful about drinking and driving, but I spent many nights at local hangouts within walking distance of the RV park. I also took advantage of the bus service. I made friends with many of the employees at my favorite bars and restaurants. I assumed I had become a resident because I had been there for 3 months. My kids were upset that I didn't go home for the holidays, but I just didn't feel like doing it. I invited them over to my house, but they declined. On Christmas Eve, I found myself at my favorite restaurant and bar, sipping margaritas and listening to holiday music. I had already finished my meal and was in no hurry to get back to my lonely trailer. It was already 8:30 p.m., and the customers had almost all left. The employees had closed all parts of the place and were cleaning up, preparing to close at 9 o'clock to go home to their families. My favorite waitress had been waiting for me all evening. I noticed that she looked almost as sad as I did. She walked up to my table and said, "Last call, Steve. Do you want one more before you go home?" I looked up at her and, without thinking, answered without hesitation. I saw a trail of tears on her cheek and reached up to wipe them away. She flinched when I reached for her and recoiled. I managed to take her hand and pull her to me and then said, "You look as sad as I do, Amanda. It looks like you've been crying. I'm sorry I scared you. I wasn't thinking. I was just going to wipe a tear from your cheek." Amanda flinched when I said that, and the tears flowed in earnest. I pulled her into my lap and hugged her while she cried. Her boss came out of the kitchen and stormed over to us. He reached for Amanda and said, "Damn it, Steve, what are you doing to Amanda? I thought you were a good guy. Now let her go and get out of here before I call the police." I let go of Amanda and started to get up, saying, "Hey, Sid. I didn't mean to upset her. I saw her crying and asked what was wrong." She started crying even harder, so I put her in my lap to hold her for a while. "Don't make a big deal out of it. I'm sorry." I started to walk away when Amanda said through a sniffle, "No, don't go, please, Steve." She turned to Sid and said, "Sid, he didn't do anything. We were just talking and I snapped. I've been feeling sorry for myself all night and, well, you know why, and when he asked me what was wrong?" Sid said, Okay, Mandy, but if he bothers you, just yell. Why don't you leave now? Me and the guys will finish up here. Try to have a Merry Christmas. Amanda replied through a sniffle. Merry Christmas, Sid. Amanda watched Sid walk back behind the bar and followed him. They talked for a bit, then he smiled and handed her a large pitcher of margaritas and 2 glasses filled with ice. By the time we had finished half of the pitcher, Amanda told me about her tears. She had to work the early shift today and had told her live-in boyfriend about it. Yesterday, she had agreed to work the evening shift for one of her friends. The friend wanted to go out of town for vacation and wanted to leave early. Money changed hands, and they traded. Shifts. Amanda went to the beach and relaxed and then came home to change clothes, grab a bite to eat, and head to work. Upon arriving at their house, she found her boyfriend in bed with 2 of her friends. Of course, she got angry and they got into an argument. Since she started living with him in his little trailer, he kicked her out of the house, threw all her clothes out the door, and locked it up. Oh, Steve, she continued. Now I have nowhere to live, and I don't make enough to rent a place, even if I could find one on Christmas Eve. Sid said I could live on a cot in his garage for a couple days, but I don't know what I'll do after that. I guess I'll have to move on. Maybe move back home if my parents will let me stay at their place for a while for free. It's a hell of a thing, isn't it? A 33-year-old woman is running home to her mom because things didn't work out for her. I caught my asshole husband cheating, divorced him, and was left with nothing. Then found another asshole cheater as a boyfriend and got my ass kicked by him. Hell, every man I've found in my entire life has done bad things to me. I don't know why I even bother. I sat for a while thinking about Mandy and her problem. Finally, I sighed and said, Mandy, I don't have much room, but you can stay with me for a while. If you want, you can use the other bed in my trailer. It's not very big, but I think it'll be better than the cot in the garage. I laughed and continued. I think we have enough in common in what our comrades have been through to give each other support. Besides, you seem like a nice enough girl, and I'd hate to see you suffer even more than before because of what some asshole did to you. And believe me, I know how you feel. I had to talk some more and do some more coaxing, but that and another pitcher of Sid's really excellent margaritas convinced Amanda to come with me, at least for the holidays. As we left, you could still hear Sid fiddling around in the kitchen. Amanda let him know we were leaving, and we staggered outside and walked down the street to my trailer. I remember struggling to get the key into the lock, and Amanda giggled as she watched me. I finally opened the door and pointed to the couch, which turned into a spare bed. Here's your bed, Mandy. The showers and restroom are in that big building in the center of camp, or you can use my little unit if you don't mind being cramped. I usually use it at night and use the camp facilities during the day. I went to bed and knew nothing more until nearly noon on Christmas Day. I probably would have slept on, but I was awakened by the damn phone ringing. I hesitated for a moment, then mumbled, L.O. I heard Chelsea giggle over the roar of conversation in the background. In an overly cheerful voice, she almost sang, Merry Christmas, Daddy. How are you? We miss you. I was doing fine until you woke me up, honey. Giggling again. Woke you up? It's already noon. Why were you sleeping at this time of day? I forgot Amanda was in the trailer and wandered into the kitchen to make coffee. I looked up and Mandy blushed, turning her head. Oh, shit, I said. Sorry. Smack! I turned and hurried back to the bedroom when Chelsea asked, What are you apologizing for, Daddy? It's okay if you take a nap. I'm sorry we woke you up. I stammered back. What? Oh, nothing, honey. I just wasn't thinking, that's all. It's okay. I walked back to the main part of the trailer and saw Amanda making coffee. She turned and looked at me, and another small blush appeared on her face. She gave me a pained smirk and said, I guess you forgot I was here, huh? Yeah, sorry. I hope I didn't embarrass you too much. Daddy, who are you talking to? I thought you were still asleep. Oh. Daddy, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. No, Chelsea, it's nothing like that. One of my friends got kicked out of the house and she slept in my other bed. I just forgot she was. Here, went into the kitchen to make coffee and startled her. You didn't interrupt anything. Chelsea giggled and I smiled, watching Mandy's blush turn to a deep crimson. Chelsea, Alex, and I chatted for a couple more minutes, after which I hung up the phone. For some reason, Amanda and I hit it off, and she never moved out of my trailer. The next 2 months flew by. Amanda insisted that since I was providing her with living space, she provide food and alcohol. It turned out she was a great cook, and we got along great. We became best buddies, but nothing more. By the end of February, it was time for me to head north again. I didn't want to spend the summer in Key West and was ready for a different landscape. On one of her days off, Mandy and I were lounging by the pool sipping margaritas. I finally made up my mind and decided I had to tell her I was moving on. I poured each of us another glass and said, Mandy, I don't know how to say this other than to just come out and punch you in the face. It's time for me to move on. I don't want to spend the summer here and I want to see my kids again. You helped me heal, and I enjoyed our time together, but... I saw Amanda's eyes glaze over slightly. There was a tremor in her voice when she said, I've been waiting for this. I knew you wanted to come back north when it got warmer. I really don't know what to do. I'm tired of working at the bar, but there's nothing else for me here. I have a little savings. I think I'll apply and take the bus home. Maybe I'll find something there. Tourist season is coming up, and a lot of places in Branson are hiring for the summer. Mom and Dad live just a few miles out of town, so I'll be able to stay with them for a while. After lunch, I went to the camp office and let them know I was leaving at the end of the week. It was Tuesday, and I figured I'd have time to tie up all the loose ends by then. I hoped Amanda could find a place to stay for the remainder of the time she was in town. The next day, Mandy came home and told me she had applied. She agreed to work for a week and train her replacement. Sid didn't. Want to give her 2 weeks' notice. She smiled and said, I'd appreciate it if you could drop me off at the bus station when you get off on Saturday. Sure. Anything for Mandy's friend. By Friday evening, I had packed everything and loaded it into the traveling compartment. The next morning, all I had to do was hook up the electricity, water, and sewer and leave. Amanda watched me make the final checks. And then a thought struck me. I said, Hey, Mandy, I'm heading north and this is on my way back to Missouri. Hell, my family only lives 70 or so miles from Branson. If you're not in a hurry to get there, why don't you come with me? I plan on stopping along the way and really don't intend to get home until mid-April. But if you want to leave early, you can. Heck, with each city closer to home, the cost of your ticket will be less. What do you say? Amanda sat looking at me, then smiled. I say yes. Thank you. I'll enjoy traveling with you and it will save me some money. But I don't think I'll stay with you for the whole trip, because I'll need to find a job sooner. A lot of places start hiring in March. I decided to go to the west coast of Florida. When I got to Fort Myers, I stayed for a week, and Mandy and I enjoyed lying on the beach, swimming in the Gulf, and relaxing. She was very special. We seemed to know what the other was thinking, and we enjoyed doing almost the same things. One night we were at a little beach diner that served great shrimp. We each drank a couple pitchers of beer and ate a ton of shrimp. The younger crowd was the majority, and seemed to resent the few older people as they treated Mandy and me. A couple times, one or the other young man at the table next to us approached to ask Mandy to dance. She always politely declined, but as each one was refused, the anger built up. We overheard several comments about her being a tease and me being an old asshole. We decided to leave and took a bathroom break before doing so. As I came out of the restroom, I heard a commotion in the women's restroom. Mandy was nowhere to be seen. Then I heard her voice, "No, asshole! Get your ass out of here and leave me alone. I told you I don't want to dance with you." Listen, sweetheart, you're a real woman and I want to dance with you. Now come on. When we're done dancing, if you still want to be with that old fart you're with now, you can find him again. We're on spring break and we're here to have fun, so let's get to it. The door to the women's restroom opened, and one of the punks who had been harassing Mandy came out of there, dragging a crying Amanda behind him. He saw me and smirked. Mandy looked at me fearfully. I didn't say anything. I took a half step toward the punk and kicked him. He let go of Amanda's hand and leaned forward. I quickly pulled Mandy towards the door. We were almost to it when one of the men at the table saw us. He stood up and said, "What the hell? I thought Joe went after that bitch." The other two headed toward the hallway where the restrooms were. I sped up and pulled Amanda out the door. As soon as it closed, I heard a scream. We rushed into the truck and I rushed outside. We were already a few feet off the road when the door of the bar opened and 3 young men jumped out. They stood and watched us drive away. Amanda was crying silently. I reached for her and held her hand on the console for a moment. It took us 10 minutes to get to our parking lot. I got Amanda into the trailer and pulled her to me for a hug. She was shaking and crying as I gently led her to my bed. I sat her down and took off her shoes and laid her on her back. I took off my shoes and climbed into the bed to cuddle her. We both drifted into sleep. I woke up once during the night to relieve myself. I then went to the front of the trailer and made Amanda's bed. That's where I spent the rest of the night. The next morning, Amanda woke me up as we were making coffee. "Steve, thank you for last night. I know you lay in bed for a while with your arms around me. Why did you leave? I didn't want to kick you out of bed." "Mandy, I needed to go to the bathroom, and you didn't need an old man hitting on you after what you went through last night. I decided it would be best for both of us if I ended the night here." "You didn't molest me. I know you would never do anything like that. Why did I even think—" She looked at my morning wood covering my pants and blushed slightly, then continued, "Oh, I know you'd never do anything I didn't want you to." Amanda finished her coffee in silence and looked at me. "Steve, I'm done. I want to go home. I think if you take me to the bus station, I'll just leave you here." "Well, I can do that if you want, but I think I'm ready to move on too. Why don't we just pack up and leave? If I find a place I want to stay, I'll take you to the bus station. It'll save you more money, and it certainly won't cost me anything, since I'll still be burning fuel to keep driving." Amanda smiled and nodded her head in agreement. "Okay, if you're really going to leave, I'll stay with you until you stop again. Just don't leave on my dime." "No. After last night, I'm ready to move on too. I doubt those assholes would turn us in even if they knew the truck's license plate number, but I still want to move on. I'd hate to run into them again later on, where they could pounce on us all at once if they felt vengeful. I was planning on going to Bradenton or Clearwater in a couple days." Mandy smiled her 1,000-watt smile and hugged me tightly. "Is there anything I can do to help us get on the road, boss?" I assigned her a couple of lighter tasks and then set about getting the rig ready to move. Strangely enough, I was getting anxious to get home to Missouri. I had seen some beautiful country, met some wonderful people, and had had a vacation, but I was ready to get back into a rut. I was tired of my idle life and was ready for a challenge, to be productive. What surprised me, however, was that I didn't want to go back to my hometown and do business. At the thought of Joan and visiting the places we had traveled to, my soul still ached. As we drove down the road, Mandy and I started talking about home. She told me that her parents had a large lot on a lake. Outside of Hollister, Missouri, a small town south of Branson. She reminisced about her childhood and how much fun they had at the lake and running up and down the hills. Her description reminded me of the property I inherited from my wife after her death. It was just under 26 acres and was on a lake near Hollister. She inherited it from her parents when they died. It was her maternal grandfather's until he died. It was all that was left of a fairly substantial farm that the government had taken away when the lake was built. He retained ownership of this small piece of land, and at one time kept a fishing camp on it. As we approached the turnoff for Bradenton, I kept my course northward. As we passed one by one the exit ramps to Clearwater, Mandy glanced at me. I saw her considering several RV parking lots that normally would have caused me to pull over and linger. Finally, she turned to me and asked, "Steve, Why are we driving on? I thought you were planning on staying in this neighborhood for a while. You know, Mandy, I decided this morning that I'm tired of Florida and want to go home. The weather is nice here this time of year, but I guess I've already stepped back and healed. When you talk about your home and the lake and the hills, I get homesick. I think I'll just move back to Missouri, at least for the summer. I can drop you off at the bus station if you want, but since I'm going home, I might as well just come with me. I'll get us home almost as fast as the bus, and it'll be much more convenient for you. Are you sure, Steve? You're not just doing this for me, are you? I wouldn't want you to. I appreciate all the help you've given me, and the trip in particular, but I don't want to ruin the trip for you. No. While you were talking, I remembered about a small piece of land that my wife and I, er, own, on a lake near Hollister. I haven't been there in years. My wife inherited it from her family, and I guess it's mine now. There used to be a fishing camp or resort there. I think I'll find it and see what it's all about. I might just bring my car there and stay for a while. I'm still not ready to go back to my old house and meet everyone. I'm sure the whole town knows what Joan did to me, and I don't want to face that. For some reason, I also can't be excited about returning to my company. My son and daughter run it as well as I do, judging by the financial reports I've been getting, so why bother? Besides, if I go back, their income will drop somewhat, and they're young and need money to get a start in life. Okay, Steve, if you're sure you're not just doing this for me, I'm fine with it. It took us 3 days to get to Amanda's house. It was very difficult to get the car through the small, narrow roads to her parents' house, but we made it. She was welcomed with open arms and lots of tears. After meeting them, I tried to drive out, but her dad didn't want to hear about it. He made me roll the trailer up to their house and hook it up to the plumbing and electricity. Amanda had told her parents how much I had helped her, so they treated me royally. Admittedly, I noticed a few questioning looks, and I was sure they were wondering about Mandy's virtue. Oh, come on. A beautiful woman has been living with a man for almost 3 months now, and they're not sleeping together. Hell, even I wouldn't have believed it, even though I knew it was true. I loved Amanda to death, but we were friends, not lovers. I just couldn't explain it. She was one of the few available women I knew. Oh, sure, I had my eye on her, but not to the point where I dared to put her to the test. After a week, I think we even convinced her parents of this. I was sitting on the terrace one evening when her father came out with a couple of bottles of Newcastle ale. He sat down next to me, handed me the beer, and said, "You know, Steve, I just can't understand you, son. You're a great guy as far as I can tell, and I appreciate you helping Mandy the way you did, but hell, I just don't understand how you all can be the way you are. Hell, I know how I'd feel if my wife did what you did, but..." I felt a surge of pain when Frank spoke of Joan. He seemed embarrassed to see the look on my face. I said, "You know, Frank, I've done some things on this trip that I'm not very proud of. I've had my share of women, especially at first. I guess I was trying to get even with Joan or something. Hell, I don't know. Maybe I was trying. To prove that I was still a man, still desirable to women or something. I don't know. When I first met Amanda, she was working at a bar in Key West, and I was attracted to her, but we became friends, buddies. When her boyfriend kicked her out of the house and I invited her to stay with me for a few days, I promised her I wouldn't bother her so much. I guess we started socializing, but neither of us felt the need to move on to anything more. Frank looked at me and shook his head. After that, we just sat and watched the sunset as night fell on those beautiful hills. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Frank turned to me again and said, Mandy told us that you have a piece of land somewhere out here on the lake. She said you were going to stay there for a while? Yeah, I figured I'd try to find it. I hadn't been there in about 10 or 12 years, I guess. It belonged to my wife. She inherited it from her grandparents. There used to be a fishing resort there, and I thought I might spend the summer there if I could find a way to move my trailer to a good spot. Frank sat and thought for a few minutes, then said, You know, about 3 miles down the road, there's a piece of land that could be yours. There are some old docks on the shore and a few crumbling shacks. I think some woman lives in the best of them and kind of looks after the place. Tomorrow is Saturday and I'm off work. We can go take a look if you want. I have a map in my trailer. I'll get it out now and we can take a look. I knew it wasn't far from here, but I wasn't sure exactly where. I was going to call around the neighborhood and try to find someone to direct me if I couldn't find it. I picked up the map and returned to my chair. Frank and I studied it and he said, "Yes, I think this is the place." He looked at my car and continued, "We'll take my little Jeep Wrangler if you don't mind. Some of the roads here can be pretty rough and narrow. There's no point in taking your truck until we're sure we've picked the right spot." Early the next morning, right after breakfast, Frank and I packed up the cooler with lunch and beer and hit the road. At the last minute, Amanda ran out and jumped into the Jeep with us. "Hey guys, I want to go too." I think we drove almost 7 miles down the road to get over the 3 miles that the crow flies, but we finally pulled up to a gate with a "no trespassing" sign. We were pretty sure this was the place, so I figured we'd just go inside. After another 300 feet down a narrow trail, we came to a steel cable stretched across the road and another "no trespassing" sign. This time, the cable was padlocked. We couldn't get past it except on foot. I said, "Well, it looks like we're going to have to hoof it from here. I don't have the key to the padlock with me. I'm not sure I even have a key." We had walked about a quarter mile when we turned a corner and saw the unkept grounds of a small resort and cabins. Only one of them looked livable, and it appeared to house an office and bait store. Behind the cabins, we could see a dilapidated dock, and beyond that, a beautiful lake. We were walking around looking around when a very upset woman came out of the shack. "What the hell are you all doing here? Can't you guys read? This is private property, and I know you ran at least one no trespassing sign to get here." As she stepped closer, I saw that she had a small pistol tucked into the waistband of her pants. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. We saw the signs, but unless I'm in the wrong place, this land belongs to me, so I'm not trespassing. I wanted to come down and look it over. If it's my land, I figured I could bring my trailer down here and spend some time there. This used to be Rory Fellow's place? If so, I inherited it when my wife Joan died. I'm Steve Rowland." The woman relaxed a little when I said that. She looked me over and said, "Yes, it was Rory's place, and I remember little Joan. I think you're okay, but you should have called me or someone else. I suppose you want me to move out, don't you?" I looked around the apartment and said, "No, that won't be necessary, unless you want to move out. From what I understand, for the right to live here, you were supposed to keep an eye on things. I can see that you've already done some things, but I wish more could be done. If you still want to live here, I can help you clean up. Look, mister, I have to work to eat. I do what I can here, but I need to work in town too to pay for food and other things." Hey, wait a minute. I didn't mean you don't do anything here, and I realize we don't pay you anything. All I said was that I could use your help to do more. If it's just the two of us working together, I want this place to look a little better, okay? Okay, but I don't like it when you talk like I'm not doing my job here, you know? Frank and I wandered around looking around the place, trying to decide where I could park my trailer. Mandy stayed behind to talk to... Hell, I didn't even remember her name. It wasn't long before Mandy caught up with us. She said, "I think Jolene is in a better mood now. I explained some things to her and she's calmed down a bit. You know, Steve, some of these hill people are very touchy. You'll learn, but you need to be a little careful in dealing with some of the folks around here until you get to know them better. You don't live far from here, but people in your part of the country behave a little differently than we do here. Of course, a lot of the people who work in Branson in the tourism industry have adapted a little bit, but even then, in their own land, they kind of go back to a different worldview." It was still late March, and cool weather was the norm. Starting the next morning, I began working on getting my car to camp. The drive down the state and county roads wasn't difficult, but I had to cut through some small trees and brush to get down the trail to the old resort. It took all day to do that. I bought a chainsaw to accomplish this task and decided to leave it at the resort. I knew I would need it again soon, and saw no point in lugging it back and forth with me. Jolene came out a couple times during the day to watch me work. When she saw me walking toward the cabin she was occupying, she came out onto the porch. "Hi, Jolene. Looks like I'm done for the day. Thought I'd leave the saw here if you have a safe place for it." "Yeah, I use the old shed for the tools I use here. That's also where I keep the mower. Let me grab my keys and I'll be right back." Back from the house, Jolene handed me the key and continued. "Here, Steve. It's an extra key for the lock. In case you lose it, I keep mine on a nail next to the front door, and the extra door key is hanging from the rafters of the second shack." As we entered the maintenance building, I looked around. All the equipment was old, but from the looks of it, Jolene had taken very good care of it. She noticed my look and said, "I know it's not fancy, but my man and I tried to keep everything old as best we could. A couple years ago, he died of a heart attack. Now it's just me. The kids are out of town. One is in Branson, and the other lives in Springfield with his wife. It is very lonely here, but I just can't leave. My husband's daddy was the caretaker here when old Mr. Fellows still lived here. When we got married, we lived in Hollister until we had to move here to care for him. When he died, we just stayed and did what we could." "That's wonderful, Jolene. I appreciate that. Before I go, I'll give you my cell phone number. I think you still have my address in case you need anything. I know we've had a few bills from you in the past that we needed to pay." "Okay. Well, I guess I'll wander around for a bit and then go back to my trailer. I think I'll try to bring it back tomorrow. I haven't decided where I'm going to put it permanently, but at least it'll be here, and I won't have to drive back and forth." The next morning I had to be careful, but I did get my trailer to the campground. I set it up near Jolene's cabin for a while so I could have water and electricity. I spent some time that morning looking around all the cabins in the area to find a more permanent parking spot. I finally found the perfect spot and got to work preparing it. It was at the far end of the open area and had a great view of the lake. I could see the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. I had afternoon and evening shade and decided I would catch the cool breezes off the lake. It seemed like I was clearing a spot for an old campground. I found a water pipe sticking out of the ground with a non-freezing faucet on the end. When I tried it, no water flowed. There was also a fallen power pole at the edge of the overgrown shrubbery plot. By mid-afternoon, I had driven my trailer to this spot and leveled it. I spent the rest of the day stacking and burning brush and debris. When Jolene got home from work, she walked part of the way to my trailer and stood looking around with her hands on her hips. I smiled and waved, walking over to her. "Steve, I see you found a nice place for your new home. You certainly made a difference in the place, too. I'm feeling a little lazy, though. You managed to get twice as much done in a day as I do." The next morning, I went to Branson and found an equipment and tool rental place. I rented a hoe and front-end loader and returned to my new home. I spent the rest of the day digging a new water line to the trailer and using the loader to push out and pile up small brush. When Jolene returned, she was once again standing and surveying the area. She shook her head and, without saying anything, left for her house. The next day, after laying the water line from the well to the trailer, I covered it and leveled the trench. Then I tackled the road, clearing the ditches and moving the brush away from the edge. I also cleared a section of beach all the way down to the lake and along a small creek that flowed next to my trailer and into the lake. I also dug up the vegetable garden area and then went back to hoeing. The next day I sowed grass in the areas that had been mowed and covered it with straw, and then I just sat and rested most of the day. It was in my 60s, so I hung my hammock up so I could look out over the lake and relax. The next project was to repair part of the dock so I could get my boat out of storage and tie up. I planned to do a lot of fishing when the season opened. I was spending money to renovate the old house, but not a lot. It was cheaper than what I was spending on the trip, and I think I was happier. I kept in touch with several people I met while traveling across the country, and they were all interested in my project. What's more, several of them said they would come visit me if I had a place where they could leave their cars for a few nights. I was excited about this and spent a few more days clearing out parking lots for my friends. I called my son and asked him to bring one of our hose and dump trucks so I could use them. I repaired the road once more and hauled several loads of gravel to improve it. And then after running water and electricity, I decided to pour concrete pads in the areas I had cleared for the RV. By this time, Jolene was no longer surprised to find another major change when she returned home. Moreover, sometimes in the evenings she would even come out and help me if I was still working. I also kept in touch with Maria and her parents. She was very interested in my little project, and every time we talked, she wanted to know what I had done since the last time. She kept marveling at the pictures I sent her, and one day said she really wanted to see the place in person. I replied, "Why not? It's very beautiful here in early June. Why don't you come and see me then? Take your parents with you if they want to come too." I think I'll do that. Can you make a reservation for me somewhere? No. I have a cabin here that's not in too bad a condition. I'll clean it up and fix the major problems, and you and your family can use it if you all come. If it's just you, that's okay too. I have some friends who plan to come here in the summer, and they have several sites for their RVs, so if you all want to come by car, you can use one of them. My kids thought I was crazy to do all this work and spend money on the old campground, but after a heated discussion, they recognized that it was my land and my money, so if it made me happy, it would be okay. Besides, I think they decided they would enjoy coming here and spending a few weekends when it got warmer. In mid-May, my first visitor showed up. They arrived with a 36-foot tractor trailer and could barely get it into the house. It took us a few minutes to properly place it on the pad and then plugged it in. The first day they arrived, we just talked and found out what was going on. Over the next week or so, they did tourist activities, attended shows in Branson, and even used my pontoon boat to spend the day on the lake. Just before the first car left, another friend of mine pulled up with a slightly smaller fifth wheel. We accommodated them, and they followed the lead of the first couple. Jolene was still unsure of her reaction to the change, but I caught her visiting friends several evenings. The second couple and I were visiting one evening, and they were complaining about the long drive into town for groceries, beer, and so on. "Steve, why don't you stock up on some stuff at that store over there? It would make life easier for your customers." "Hey, Haas," I said. "I don't run an RV here. My family has owned this place for years, and I just poured some pads so my friends and family can park when they stop by." "What hell, Steve? You've got a gold mine here. I guess I thought you were going into business. I've been telling some of our friends how nice it is here, and a couple of them have told me they plan to come and stay with you." "I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I'll call them and tell them they need to find another place to stay when they come to Branson." When the first couple left, they tried to pay me for the place. I refused because I told them I considered them friends and guests, not customers. "Damn it, Steve. I consider you a friend, but you've put a lot of labor and money into setting this place up. We've used your water, electricity, and sewer. You need to do something about that at least." He pushed a check toward me and said, "Here, take this check for electricity and water at least. Besides, I never paid you for the boat and fuel we used. I know it's not as much as some nicer places, but I figured $30 a day for the site and added another $250 for the boat and fuel. Now I won't take no for an answer. Heck, the old lady and I want to go back. You have a great place to vacation here. If you had a pool, it would be perfect." As the second couple was leaving, they also insisted on leaving me a small check for the electric bill. To my surprise, late in the evening of June 1st, I received a phone call from Maria. "Steve, were you serious when you said I could come see you on June 1st? "Of course, Maria. Will you come over? I would love to see you here. I've missed our conversations and would love to see you again." "Good. I was afraid you were just being polite. When can we come over?" "Anytime you want to show up, dear. I don't do anything but fiddle around with things. I've already had a couple friends stay for a few days, but they left last week. It's just me and the caretaker here now." "Steve, we're in Hollister now. Can we come over tonight?" "Hell yes. Do you need directions or can I come and walk you over? What are you driving?" "We took Dad's motorhome. Is that okay?" Oh shit, honey, it's going to be crowded. The campground will handle it, but a couple turns in the road will be tough. The county road here is really narrow, too. Maria and her parents entered the address into their GPS, and before I could open the gate, they were already there. I looked up at the Class A motorhome and stared at them. Heck, I knew they were huge, but this one looked like a monster trying to roll into my little narrow driveway. I watched and watched as Phil, Maria's father, slowly made his way through my gate and started down the road. I walked ahead of him and watched. There was one steep turn that bothered me. When he got to it, he was halfway down and I had to stop him. His rear wheels were going off the road into a ditch, and it was deep enough that he would have gotten stuck if he had kept going. I walked up to the bus and made him back up. Fortunately, I still had a hoe and a couple pieces of gravel at camp. I drove to camp and brought several buckets of gravel to fill in the ditches on either side of the turn so he could drive into them and around the corner. In one place, I had to cut some tree limbs so he could drive under them. Jolene was standing in the yard with her mouth open when we came into her field of vision. She just stood there watching Phil put his car in the spot closest to mine and plugged in. When he came out to secure the fishing line, she came over to us and said, "I never thought I'd see something like this here in my life. You all must be crazy to bring that thing out here in the hills." I was still listening to Jolene when a small figure jumped down from the last step of the van, dodged Phil, and jumped into my arms. "Oh, Steve, it's so good to see you again. I've missed you so much." I looked at Phil and Felicia as she walked down the steps. My mouth was open and Phil was grinning. He shrugged and winked. Maria moved over to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. To say I was stunned was an understatement. I didn't know how to react, and I think Maria finally realized it. She pulled away from me a little and looked me in the face. "Steve, is something wrong?" "No. You just surprised me, that's all. It's good to see you all." At that moment, a small car pulled into the yard next to us. I looked back and smiled. Amanda jumped out of the car and jumped up to me. She wrapped her arms around me and kissed my cheek, then stepped back. She looked around at my new guests and said, "Hi, everyone. I'm Mandy. I didn't know you guys were here. I just came to talk to Steve and then I'll get out of your way." Mandy's eyes glistened. She said, "Steve, I should have stopped by here first and told you the news." "Oh, Steve, I got the job. I'm the new assistant manager at Ride the Ducks. I work from noon till closing. Now I can pay you back all the money you spent on me in Florida. I just should have told you that before I went home." "Mandy, honey, we had a deal in Florida. You bought the food and I paid for the trailer space. You don't owe me anything else. I'd still spend most of the money on the two of us if it was just me." "Yes, I know, but I owe you at least for the ride home, and I intend to pay." Maria looked at Amanda, her jaw clenched and her eyes glittering. I thought tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. I saw a hint of the Hispanic woman character I'd encountered a couple times in San Antonio. She turned and almost collided with the van. Felicia looked at me, and without saying a word, followed Mandy. Phil looked at me, and Mandy shook his head and continued setting up his van. Mandy looked at me, then at the van. "Steve, is there something wrong here? I didn't mean to interrupt you." "I don't know, Mandy. It's Maria and her family. I thought I told you about them. They have an RV parking lot near San Antonio. We became friends while I was there, and I invited them to visit. They just arrived, and I thought everything was fine until you showed up." Mandy thought for a moment, and then she made a grimace and said, "Oh, shit. That's the girl you've been talking to all the time, isn't it? The one you've been pining for?" I nodded my head affirmatively, and she continued, "Steve, I'm sorry. I think I messed things up for you. Shit. I hope I can fix it now." Mandy walked around the front of the van and said, "Sir, I think I've made a big mistake. Can I come into your van and try to work things out with your daughter and wife?" I didn't hear what Phil said, but Mandy walked back to the door, knocked and walked in without waiting for an answer. I stood looking at the door as Phil came back and stood next to me. About that time, I heard Maria screaming inside the van. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but I knew she wasn't happy. I heard a smack and a scream from Mandy, and then Felicia's voice. Phil looked at me and said, "Well, son, I think we have a real problem here. If you had another woman, you should have told Maria about her before we got here. You know she hasn't even looked at another man since you left us. All she could talk about was coming here and seeing your son. How long have you been with this woman?" I didn't know which part of Phil's conversation to address first. I was in shock. Hell, I knew Maria and I had been close in Texas, but damn. Hell, I was 40, and she was what? Maybe 28. Hell, she wasn't much older than my kids, and it sounded like she thought we were a couple. Shit, what am I supposed to do now? Admittedly, if I'd gotten involved with another woman, Maria or someone like her would have been a good catch, but damn, she was just a kid. Finally, I decided to answer all of his questions, but in reverse order. I told him about Amanda and how we were just good friends. I explained how we started living and traveling together, and then I said, "Damn it, Phil. I had no idea Maria thought we were more than just good friends. I..." Phil looked at me and said, "Son, do you really think my Maria just jumps into bed with any of our guests? I was thinking more about you." "Oh shit, Phil. You know that's not what I meant. Oh shit, I don't know what I meant. I guess I really screwed up, didn't I?" There had been silence in the van for some time now. The door opened and Amanda stepped out. She had a red stain on her cheek. Maria followed her out, her gaze lowered. Felicia was the last in line, and she looked sheepish but pleased. I sighed, not seeing blood. Well, not really. I walked over to Amanda and touched her cheek. She took my hand and squeezed it. "It's okay, Steve. I think we've got it all sorted out. Now I need to get home. Will you walk me to my car?" Mandy pulled me away from the group. When we reached her car, she stood on tiptoe and kissed my cheek again, then whispered, "Steve, this woman loves you to death. If you have any brains at all, you'll cling to her and never let go. Now I have to go home and you need to talk to Maria." I hugged Mandy and closed her car door as she got in. I watched her drive away and then turned and walked back to the Hardys, who were standing outside their van looking at me. Maria looked guilty and looked at me with a look of fear on her face. I walked over to the group and took Maria's hands in mine. I squeezed them, then lifted her chin to look into her eyes. None of us said anything. I turned to her father and said, "Look, I hate to be a bad host, but could you and Felicia relax for a few minutes? I think I need to talk to Maria, please." Maria looked startled again. As we turned and started to leave, I noticed a slight wink in Phil's eyes. I wondered if he was that confident or not. Hell, even I didn't know what to say or do. Maria and I walked in silence. After a few steps, I felt her take my hand. I looked up at her from below and caught her gaze in my direction. I led her to the clearing I had opened. There, I set up my hammock and a couple chairs around the fire. The grotto was secluded. You couldn't see the RV park from it, but you could watch the lake and admire the sunset and sunrise. A short path led to a creek where I had a small swimming hole that I used when I wanted to snorkel. Instead of sitting down in the chairs, I stopped and turned to Maria. I gently pulled her into my arms. I kissed the top of her head, took a deep breath and said, "Maria, I guess I'm just an ignorant man here. I knew we were close and had a great time in San Antonio. I felt closer to you than any other woman I have found on this journey of mine. I think you were the one who helped me heal and get over the betrayal and death of my wife. You were my friend and my lover when I desperately needed both. I always looked forward to our conversations on the phone and was very excited and happy when you agreed to come to me. I took a deep breath and continued. I just never thought, hell, I have a son 6 years younger than you. I didn't realize how you felt about me." Maria began to cry and through her tears said, "Steve, how could you? Do you really think I jump into bed with every guy I meet at? Camp who is handsome and flirts with me? Do you think I'm some kind of puta slut? I thought you felt the same way I do. Your age means nothing to me. It doesn't." I don't care about the age of your kids. I care about you. When you left, I thought we had a deal. We agreed to keep in touch while you healed, and we agreed to see each other again. After I met you and we spent time together, I didn't see any other man that I had the slightest interest in. You showed me that a man can be gentle, loving, and caring and still be my hombre, all man. And now you're telling me you don't love me, that I was just a piece of ass? No. Maria, never. I. You are so much more than that to me. You're a wonderful, beautiful, intelligent woman. I think of you often and enjoy your company immensely. I just never realized that you might consider me more than just a good friend. If no, when I marry again, I'll consider myself unspeakably lucky to be able to marry someone like you. But not to me. Is that what you mean, Steve? Not to a kid like me? No, Maria. That's not what I'm saying. I need time for my tired old brain to think over this wonderful gift you're offering me. I think of you many times, even when we're not on the phone. Even when Amanda and I were living together, I thought of you. Did she tell you that we never had intimacy? Maria nodded her head, then smiled briefly and whispered, I'm not sure I believe her. She's a beautiful woman and a good person, I think. I'm not sure any man could live with her for 3 months in a small trailer and not get her into bed. Maria pressed her lips together tightly, then said, That's good, Steve, but how many have you had fun with since you left me? None, Maria. There were many before you, after Joan died, and none afterward. At times I thought about it, but I decided I was putting it off because of Mandy. Maria started to cry, and I could see the anger on her face. I hurried my response and continued, No, Maria, that's not what I meant. I meant that I usually bring women to my trailer, and since she was there, I didn't feel like, oh, shit. Everything I'm about to say would be untrue. I admitted that since our breakup, I hadn't had any interest in other women. Sure, I admired beautiful women as any man should, but I'd never even tried to get another into bed. I just wasn't interested. Only one woman had been in my bed since I left San Antonio, and that was Amanda. We were out to dinner one night, and some college guys tried to hit on her. She got upset, and I kept her in my bed for part of the night. But we were fully clothed. Maria smiled and said, Yes. She told me about that night. She said her feelings were hurt when she woke up and found you sleeping on the couch she usually used. The rest of the week we went fishing, lay around camp, or went to whatever shows they wanted to see. Sometimes we would look at buildings and locations. The more they saw, the more Maria and Phil tried to talk me into reopening the campground and RV parking lot. And that Friday morning, Phil and I went into town to get some groceries. I still worked a little bit each day, but very little. I mostly bought groceries and things needed to entertain Maria and her parents. When we got back, Maria and Felicia were working on the cabin, which was in better condition. They had ripped off a lot of rotten boards, ripped out the carpet in the living area, and had already finished taking apart the ruined kitchen cabinets. Maria turned as we entered the cabin and smiled at me. She jumped up to me and gave me a hug. Then she pulled away and looked at me as if guiltily. Honey, please don't be mad at us for starting this job before we talk to you again. We talked this morning after you left and decided that this cabin could be renovated for very little money. Even if you buy new appliances and cabinets, I think we can do it for less than $5,000 if we do the work ourselves. One of your friends called while you were gone and wanted to stop by for a visit if you were home and had room for their van. I told them to come over. There was plenty of room. Was that okay? Anyway, after I did that, we talked about the cabin, like I said, and decided to start working on it. If we can get it finished next week, they will be able to see it while they are here. I know it will be available to rent for at least $700 a week and at least $900 during the heaviest vacation season. If you do that, you'll recoup the cost of the renovation before the summer is over. We can send them pictures of the cabin and the park itself so they can show them to others, and I know Mom and Dad will have pictures on display in their park when they get home. We have heard some of the people who stay in our RVs say they were going to come to Branson or have been here recently. A beautiful park like yours, I'm sure some would come here to stay, even as far away from the city as it is. A lot of people don't like the hustle and bustle of a big park in a crowded area. I'm sure athletes would come here as well. Please, can we at least finish this cabin? I laughed and hugged her. Her enthusiasm was impossible to resist. Okay, okay. We'll finish this cabin, and I'll clear out a couple more RV parking lots. I'll call Alex tonight and arrange for him to keep the backhoe longer and send over the tools I'll need. Maria made an embarrassed look and said, Thank you, dear. I know you won't regret it. Do you think we could open a little store that sells items that run out quickly? You know, dry goods, sodas, canned goods, and so on. If you put up an ad for fishermen, you could even stock up on fishing supplies. I bet if you had a liquor license, you'd make money selling beer to your guests too. We sell a lot at Daddy's Park. Couldn't we do that? I laughed again, then said, I'm not so sure about that, Maria. Jolene lives in the old office and store, and that's where we'll have to put all this stuff. We may even have to replace the refrigerators. I'm not sure she'd want the store back in her house. Can we ask, please? Or we can put another shack for an office and store if she won't let us use her shack. I don't feel like talking about it either. Jolene is a good person, but you know she doesn't do much around here to earn free rent. I think you should ask her to do more or maybe start charging her. I'm not sure that's right for me, dear. Let me think about it for a while. Saturday morning, Mary and her mother went into town to find carpet and cabinets and stuff for the cabin. Phil, I think, was napping. I was sitting in the shade resting when Jolene came out and sat next to me. I decided this would be a good time to bring up the subject of the little store and some of the other things Maria had mentioned. Jolene, how are you doing this fine morning? I think I'm fine, Steve. Just feeling a little overwhelmed or something. I guess I feel guilty too. I know I don't really help you out on evenings and weekends. Hell, you do everything during the week that I did on weekends. It's a little busier around here now than I'm used to. It doesn't feel that way, if you know what I mean. Steve, I don't think I'm going to want to keep working here if you bring in a bunch of people who are always running around, sticking their noses into things, and always messing around. I was wondering what you were going to do here. Jolene, I'm sorry. I probably should have talked to you about this earlier. When I came here, all I wanted to do was bring my trailer here and live in silence like you. Then I got calls from friends who wanted to visit me, and I set aside a few places for them when they came over. And now, hell, I don't know how to say this without it sounding bad, but I guess Maria and I. Jolene laughed and interjected into my conversation. She said, Yeah, I know about that. Yeah, a blind man could see what's going on in there. When are you going to make it permanent? I don't think this woman plans to come home when her parents leave. It's not right to keep her tied up without knowing how permanent she needs to be. But that's not what I mean. It looks like you're going to make a fleet of RVs here, and I don't want to live in one of them. Is that what you're doing, Steve? I wasn't planning on doing that, but I guess I'm kind of on board with it, Jolene. Maria's excited about it, and Phil and Felicia think it'll work. I really don't want to quit my job at my age, but I also don't want to go home and run a construction company again. I think I'll let Maria talk me into opening a small RV park and see what happens. Hell, she even wants to open a little grocery store with groceries, snacks, and beer to sell to our customers and the fishermen she thinks will use our marina. I was afraid that's exactly what was going to happen. Steve, you won't be upset if I find another place, more secluded, and move on? No, I understand. I can't say I want to put up with noisier people, but for Maria, I guess I'll have to. I have to admit that I've grown to love this girl, and if she wants an RV park, I'll let her have it. She grew up in a park like that, so I know she knows how to run it. Phil and Felicia were going to stay another 2 weeks. That would be long enough to help me fix up one cabin and do most of the hard work in the store and office. After Jolene left, Mary and I would remodel the living quarters in the office building and move in there. We had a large living room, kitchen dining room, and 2 bedrooms in the back of the office and small store. It was just enough for the 2 of us. I have to admit that I had plans to furnish things pretty fancy. I loved the comforts of home. When I traveled in an RV or went camping, it was different, and I put up with less luxury. But my house was my fortress, and I wanted it to be very comfortable. One day when we were in town doing some shopping before her parents left, I bought Maria an engagement ring. I don't remember asking her to marry me, but I can't say I was upset with the way things turned out. She took me to the store, and we picked out a ring. Her smile lit up the sky for the rest of the evening. Every time I looked at her, she was either looking at the ring again, or her mom was doing it. After the ladies admired the ring for a while, and we barbecued in my nook by the creek, Phil and Felicia disappeared. I opened the locker I kept in my grotto and pulled out a foam mattress and blanket from there. Maria and I sat and cuddled together, watching the sun set and nightfall. That's how we spent the night under the stars. The next morning, we put the mattress aside and walked to a small creek. About a half hour later, we were back in Phil and Felicia's van, holding hands. Phil was sitting in a chair under the awning drinking his morning coffee. Felicia was fiddling with the small gas grill and stove I had set up there for the convenience of the campers. Phil stood up and reached out to enclose his daughter in a hug. He hugged her and then said, "Honey, listening to you made me proud of my old heart. You have done what a good woman does to her man. If you take as good care of him as apparently he has taken care of you, you will have a wonderful life together. I just couldn't help but tease you both, and kind of wanted to thank you." Phil looked at Felicia and continued, "After listening to you two, Mom and I got a little excited too. It's been a while since I've worked so much at night." Felicia turned and looked at Phil, then said, "Well, you old prick, if you worked less outside and more when we go to bed, maybe something like this would happen more often." "I'm sorry, honey," Phil said. "I didn't realize I had neglected you. I'll be better from now on." Next chapter. We got our liquor license, bought new beer coolers and a few cold foods. Mostly I didn't buy anything to sell, so I wouldn't eat it myself if no one bought it. I kept 2 or 3 gallons of milk, some juice, and a couple cases of several varieties of soda. We also stocked up on candy, chips, and the like. Of course, we kept some groceries as well. I stocked up on vegetables, soups, flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples. We didn't have any fresh meat except for a couple packages of lunch meat. I had some eggs, bacon, sausage, and so on. I sold meat, but kept it frozen. That way, if it didn't sell, I could use it myself. Even without much advertising, we started getting calls and RVs started coming in. When I put up some signs and sent an ad to RV and camping magazines, business increased dramatically. Some of the late weekends in the summer, we were busy to the brim. I had to constantly restock the store, and we made a small profit there as well. Maria was happy, and when she was happy, she made sure I was very happy. Enough said. I decided that we would close the park at the end of September because most of the campers and fishermen had left by then. We spent a couple weeks cleaning up and fixing things, and then headed to San Antonio to see Maria's parents and get married. Everyone said the wedding was perfect. It probably was, but as you know, it's a women's business, so I take their word for it. I took Mariah to Florida for her honeymoon, after which we returned to San Antonio. We agreed that we would run her parents' RV park from November through February so they could travel. In March, we would return home and open our own RV park for the summer. Phil and Felicia would visit us for the summer, leaving their park in the hands of a fairly competent assistant. Business at their park in the summer was minimal, but they still spent most of the summer there to keep things running smoothly. In the winter, when we ran Phil and Felicia's RV park, I asked Amanda to serve as our park caretaker. She did minor cleaning, repairs, and made sure there was no vandalism. She lived in one of the cabins. During the summer, she worked in Branson at seasonal jobs. After a year, I even hired her part-time on evenings and weekends during the summer. I allowed her to continue living in the cabin as part of her paycheck. In the second year of our marriage, Maria talked me into getting her pregnant. She said she would be happy with one child, but she desperately wanted one of my babies. We had a son, whom we named Stephen Philip Rowland. From the beginning, Maria was very different from Joan. I had no idea what a difference a marriage based on love and respect could bring. Joan and I married because we had to, and I think she resented that all her life. I suspect we wouldn't have gotten married if she hadn't gotten pregnant. But Maria? I know I would die if she died or left me, but her leaving or cheating is one thing I don't have to worry about. Looking back, I don't think I have ever received this level of love or respect from Joan. She was never as content with our lives as Maria was with hers. I hated what Joan did to us, but now I realize what she may have been looking for. I know it sounds corny, but Maria and I are one. Where one goes, the other goes. We work in full view of each other most of the day and never tire of each other's presence. Joan and I have never been so close. I knew then, and I see now, that we both almost looked for opportunities to be away from each other. Even when we were home with each other, we were rarely in the same place together. Don't get me wrong. We run errands or go shopping in town without each other, but that's about it. We don't run around at night without each other. We don't have boys or girls' nights out, etc. People who do that don't have a marriage. They just live together. Amanda has finally found the perfect man. I'd like to think that Maria and I helped her do that. One of my friends from home lost his wife to a major illness. We invited him to stay at the cabin a few times to help him forget. After about a year, we noticed that when he was there, Amanda never strayed far from him. They got closer and closer, and finally it happened. One Sunday morning, Amanda came to our house radiant. She showed us her new engagement ring. Amanda still helps out at the RV park, and she and Wally live in the cabin we let her have. Wally got a maintenance job at Silver Dollar City. Amanda quit her job in the city. She is now a housewife and mother when she is not helping us run the park. I added a room to the cabin where Wally and Amanda live for their child. After my wife's betrayal and death, it took traveling across the country for me to move on with my life. At first, I thought I could never get over the betrayal and the pain she caused me. Now I can safely say that I have moved past it and am living a much happier and more peaceful life than I ever thought possible 5 years ago when the shit came crashing down on me that horrible night. I thank my Spanish angel for her love and guidance as I continue my journey through life. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.